So in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, there is no shortage of exploration. We go as far as North America in the game. But before that, when Sigurd returns to your settlement in Norway at the beginning of the game, he has this little interesting tidbit that you have to listen to, and it actually plays into how he got involved with the Assassin Order. This is the clip.
Through Rusland we barreled down the Volga River, raiding as we went. Shadowy tribes hurling at Miklagard. We saw men bedecked in riches as vibrant as the Bifrost itself. And these we took for our troubles, of course. We sailed to Rome, then Africa, past oceans of sand, warriors of all colors, and beauty the eyes must weep to behold.
And essentially, this is representative of some larger theme that Assassin's Creed Valhalla only sort of touches on, which is that the Vikings actually explored a lot of places. We usually think of them as just in England and Norway, but they actually went pretty far. From Canada to Constantinople. They spanned a very large area of the world that they explored. So in this video, I'm going to look at all the places that the Vikings went and the nature of their interactions with various parts of the world. So of course, the Viking homeland is in Scandinavia. Today we know those countries as Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. They didn't really come from Finland as much, even though that is part of Scandinavia. And no one really knows why they ventured out and did all this raiding and settling in various areas. Some people theorize that it was a Malthusian crisis. Human food production expands linearly, but human population expands exponentially. So essentially you're going to get a point where food production can't keep up with your people. There might be some evidence of climate change. The world might have cooled a little bit during this time. There's also an idea of, in the Norse traditions, the second sons wouldn't receive the inheritance. So you just had a bunch of men that knew how to fight and they didn't have any resources. And then there's also the idea that they did it for revenge after Charlemagne and other European kingdoms forced Christianity onto a lot of the pagan areas in Northern Europe. So the first Viking raid ever recorded was in January 6th, 793 AD, in the Lindisfarne Monastery, which is on an island just off the northeast coast of England. And this sort of began the regular occurrence of Viking raids and settlement into the English Isles. This hit its full stride in the 800s. I talked about last video how in 865 the heathen army invaded England and it took over much of England. I'll link to that video here. The 9th century or the 800s was kind of the big time for the Vikings. There was lots of settlement in England. There was also some settlement in the north of Scotland and the coastal regions of Ireland. Around this time, they also moved outside of the English Isles. They did a lot of raiding on the North European coast in what was at the time West Francia and Middle Francia. They actually ended up taking a whole part of what is now Normandy for themselves. Normandy actually is a Viking name, and you see a little bit of this in Valhalla, where you meet Rollo in the Essex arc, where he takes the princess back to France, and later Rollo would actually end up founding the Viking settlements in Normandy. Vikings also moved into the Iberian Peninsula, what is modern-day Spain and Portugal. Although they didn't have nearly as much success there, they also settled along the Baltic coast, up in what is now Poland and the Baltic countries. Also in the 9th century, and this is where we start to get to what Sigurd was talking about, he talks about how they went through Rusland, which is now modern-day Russia. They went through various rivers in Europe, the Volga River, like Sigurd says, as well as the Dnieper and other places. They ended up coming all the way down from the Baltic area, down into the Black and Caspian Seas, into the Caucasus a little bit. They even made it to Constantinople, which Sigurd calls Miklagard Midgard and the Clip, that was the Viking name for it. And by 860, the Vikings went into Italy and Sicily, as well as parts of northern Africa, which is more of what Sigurd was saying. And then by 870, the Vikings had started to move into Iceland, where they had limited settlements there as well, mostly in the coastal regions. By the 10th century or 900s, the Vikings also moved into Greenland, as well as further inland into the Abbasid Empire, which was the Islamic Caliphate at the time. There is actually some contemporary evidence for this. Not only is there actually accounts from the Muslim world of Viking burials showing that they did meet Vikings, there's actually Damascus stele that can be found in Viking gravesites showing that they did indeed make it to the Middle East. Probably the most famous of the Viking expansionist attempts is into the New World, and how the Vikings actually were the first Europeans in North America rather than Christopher Columbus and his crew. This started in the either late 10th century or the very early 11th century, so around 1000 AD is when this would have happened. The game, obviously set in 873 AD, does this about 100 years early, although in the codex it does sort of gloss over that and say that this was just an example of Norse settlement that came before the known time. In terms of where in the New World, it was mostly on the eastern coast of Canada. Baffin Island was the first place that the Vikings went, although they didn't stay there that long. And then the Labrador coast, as well as Newfoundland. Newfoundland is believed to be Vinland, which was the main Viking settlement in North America. The Labrador coast, there is even some speculation that the Vikings made it to Maine in the modern US, although that is not confirmed and there is no evidence of that. The main reason for this was actually because the Norse that had moved into Greenland didn't really have any supplies. If you've ever been to Greenland, you'll know there's really not too much there in the way of natural resources, not a lot of timber. For example, the book Collapse by Jared Diamond actually has a pretty good chapter on the Vikings in Vinland, and actually points out the main reason that the Vikings left. The Vikings stayed in North America for less than a decade, it is thought, and the main reason for that is a mix of weak supply lines and hostile natives. Eric the Red's son, he actually was killed by the natives. He took an arrow to the stomach, and he said, quote, "We found a land of fine resources, though we'll hardly enjoy much of them." And of course, with the weak supply lines, they really couldn't get stuff or manpower over there enough to effectively colonize like the Europeans could hundreds of years later. The same thing actually happened in Greenland a little bit, and Greenland was eventually abandoned. So in short, Sigurd's little speech at the beginning of the game actually is totally feasible and in line with what the Vikings were doing at the time. The only inconsistency, not so much in Sigurd's thing but in the game, is of course the exploration of the New World and Vinland is too early. So that's it for this video, guys. Hope you enjoyed, hope you learned something, and I will see you in the next one.